You've spent your life being told you're overthinking, overcomplicating, or just plain weird. You see things others miss, and you struggle to explain how you know what you know. That feeling of being fundamentally different? According to Carl Jung, it's not a flaw. It's a form of hidden genius that most people cannot even perceive. Carl Jung, in his groundbreaking research on human psychology, identified a particular kind of mind that possesses an unusual form of intelligence. This isn't simply about thinking differently or more deeply than others. It goes further than that. These minds don't just process the same information in a different way. They perceive entirely different layers of reality that most people cannot access, patterns that haven't fully formed yet, connections between seemingly unrelated systems, psychological undercurrents driving behavior, possibilities emerging beneath surface events. Jung called this cognitive function intuition, and he recognized that people whose minds operate primarily through this function live in a fundamentally different perceptual world than those focused on concrete, immediate reality. They see the invisible architecture, the emerging trajectories, the systemic relationships, the potentialities. Later, a psychological typing system based on Jung's theory identified 4 specific personality types where this intuitive function dominates: INFJ, INTJ, INFP, and INTP. These are what we call deep intuitives, and they represent roughly 8 to 10% of the population. But here's the paradox that Jung himself struggled with. How can a form of intelligence be both extraordinarily powerful and completely unrecognized at the same time? What is it about intuitive genius that makes it so easy to dismiss? Here's the short answer. This intelligence operates invisibly. It works in prevention, early detection, and synthesis, contributions that leave almost no trace until outcomes prove them right. And here's what makes this worse. Even our modern scientific research methods are built on sensing-type perception, the opposite of intuitive perception. The entire system of how we validate knowledge prioritizes what can be observed, measured, and repeated in concrete terms, which means the very framework we use to determine what counts as intelligence is biased against the way intuitive minds naturally operate, even when the original breakthrough idea came from an intuitive genius like Einstein or Tesla. But that's only the surface. The deeper answer, the one that will actually make sense of your entire experience, you'll discover as we move through this video. Because each form of hidden genius I'm about to reveal will show you exactly why it stays hidden. Stay with me because I'm going to reveal the 4 forms of hidden genius that deep intuitives possess. The invisible intelligence that shapes outcomes, solves impossible problems, and creates value in ways the world consistently fails to recognize or reward. And then I'll show you how to make this genius visible without diluting its power. This isn't about ego or superiority. It's about finally naming and claiming a form of intelligence that you've been told your entire life doesn't count because it doesn't fit conventional metrics. And it's about understanding why this particular cognitive wiring isn't just different, it's essential. The first form of hidden genius is something rare. The ability to recognize patterns across seemingly unrelated domains and synthesize them into insights that neither domain could produce alone. Here's what most people call intelligence: the ability to master a single domain deeply, to accumulate expertise in one field, to become the authority on one subject. And that's valuable, but it's not what deep intuitives do best. What deep intuitives possess is this capacity for pattern synthesis. They see the connection between narrative structure in film and strategic planning in business, between psychological attachment theory and organizational behavior, between musical composition and mathematical elegance, between ecological systems and social dynamics. This isn't casual metaphor making, it's genuine cognitive synthesis, the ability to extract the underlying structure from one domain and recognize its manifestation in another, then use that recognition to solve problems that stump specialists. When a deep intuitive says, "This organizational problem has the same structure as a family systems issue I studied," they're not being reductive. They're identifying the actual structural dynamics at play beneath the surface content. When they recognize that a technical problem mirrors a philosophical paradox they encountered years ago, they're accessing a form of knowledge that doesn't exist in any single discipline. Jung called this intuitive perception of the archetypal, the ability to see the patterns that repeat across different scales and contexts. Modern cognitive science calls it analogical reasoning at distance, and it's one of the strongest predictors of creative breakthrough and innovation. But here's why this genius remains hidden. The deep intuitive often can't easily explain how they made the connection. They can describe the insight, but the path to it happened through unconscious pattern matching that bypassed linear reasoning. And in a world that values "show your work," this makes their genius look like luck or hand-waving. Except it's not. When you track their accuracy over time, when you watch them consistently identify solutions that specialists miss, when you see them predict how systems will behave by recognizing patterns from completely different domains, you realize you're watching a form of intelligence that most people simply don't possess. And this is part of why the paradox exists. Pattern synthesis can't be demonstrated on demand. You can't prove you made the connection until the insight proves valuable. The genius remains hidden until it's validated by outcome. But pattern synthesis is just the beginning. There's another form of genius that deep intuitives deploy constantly, one that literally holds systems together, but almost no one notices it's happening. Stay with me. The second form of hidden genius is the ability to navigate genuine complexity and think in systems. Most people simplify to understand. They reduce complexity to manageable categories, find the one key variable, identify the single cause. And for simple problems, this works perfectly fine. Deep intuitives do the opposite, and this is their genius. They can hold multiple contradictory perspectives simultaneously without collapsing them into false synthesis. They can track cascading consequences across interconnected systems without losing any thread. They can see second-order, third-order, fourth-order effects, while others are still debating first-order impacts. This isn't academic. This is the person who sees that the proposed solution to problem A will create problem B in 6 months and problem C in a year, and actually make problem A worse in 2 years. This is the person who understands that the issue everyone's focused on isn't the actual issue. It's a symptom of 3 deeper structural dynamics that no one else has noticed yet. When deep intuitives say it's more complicated than that, they're not being difficult. They're accurately perceiving genuine complexity that actually exists. When they resist the simple narrative everyone wants to believe, they're protecting against oversimplification that will lead to ineffective or counterproductive action. This form of systems thinking, the ability to perceive interconnection, feedback loops, emergent properties, and non-linear dynamics, is exactly what's needed for the most important challenges we face. Climate systems, economic systems, social systems, technological systems. These aren't simple cause and effect problems. They're complex adaptive systems that require minds capable of navigating genuine complexity without collapsing it. And deep intuitives do this naturally, not because they studied systems theory, though many are drawn to it because it finally gives them language for what they've always seen, but because their cognitive wiring naturally perceives relationality and pattern across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The tragedy is that this genius is consistently punished in most environments. Meetings want simple answers. Management wants clear action items. Culture wants digestible narratives. And when the deep intuitive tries to convey the actual complexity, they're labeled as overthinking, overcomplicating, or unable to make decisions. But track what happens when their warnings are ignored. Track what unfolds when the simplified solution gets implemented. Track the preventable disasters that occur because no one in the room could hold the complexity that the deep intuitive was seeing clearly. Their genius isn't in making things complicated. It's in perceiving the complexity that actually exists and navigating it effectively. That's irreplaceable. Now you might be thinking, pattern synthesis and systems thinking are impressive, but they're still somewhat abstract. What about direct human impact? That's where the third form of hidden genius emerges, and it's the one that changes individual lives in ways that almost never get credited. Keep watching. The third form of hidden genius is depth perception of human psychology. There's a specific moment that happens in conversations with deep intuitives, though most people don't consciously register it. It's the moment when they say something that reveals they understand you better than you understand yourself. Not your surface preferences or obvious traits, your actual psychological architecture, your hidden motivations, your unspoken fears, the pattern that's been running your life that you've never quite named. Deep intuitives possess what psychologists call theory of mind at an exceptionally sophisticated level. But it's more than that. They don't just understand that other people have internal experiences. They can often map those experiences with remarkable accuracy, even with limited information. They notice the micro-expression that contradicts your words. They hear the specific phrasing that reveals your underlying belief system. They sense the emotional undercurrent driving behavior that the person themselves doesn't recognize. They detect the childhood wound still operating in adult relationships. They see the defense mechanism masquerading as personality trait. This isn't cold analysis, though it can look that way from the outside. It's deep pattern recognition applied to human psychology. They've observed human behavior across countless contexts, extracted the recurring patterns, and developed an intuitive database of psychological dynamics that they access unconsciously and rapidly. When they just know that someone is being dishonest, they're not psychic. They're detecting micro-incongruencies between verbal content, non-verbal behavior, and contextual expectations that don't consciously register for most people. When they predict exactly how someone will respond to a situation, they're running an internal simulation based on accurate psychological modeling. When they understand your emotional experience with uncanny precision, they're combining empathy with sophisticated pattern recognition of emotional dynamics. And this creates genuine value. The friend whose single question cuts through your confusion and reveals what you actually need to address. The colleague who understands the team dynamics no one else sees and suggests the intervention that actually works. The mentor who perceives your potential before you do and knows exactly what you need to hear to access it. But here's why this genius stays hidden. It's invisible until it's validated by outcome. You can't prove you understood someone deeply until time demonstrates the accuracy. You can't demonstrate psychological insight in a presentation. And when deep intuitives try to explain how they know what they know, it sounds like presumption because the evidence trail is internal and experiential. So they learn to couch their insights carefully. I might be wrong, but this is just my sense. Take this with a grain of salt. They've been trained to apologize for perceiving accurately because their perception makes others uncomfortable. And remember the question from the beginning, why does this intelligence go unrecognized? Here's another layer. Depth perception of human psychology makes people uncomfortable. When you see someone more clearly than they see themselves, they don't credit your intelligence, they feel exposed. So the genius that could help most gets hidden to preserve social comfort, but track their accuracy. Note how often that just a sense proves exactly right. Pay attention to how many times their psychological read on a situation predicts the outcome while everyone else is surprised. This isn't guessing. This is a form of intelligence that operates at a level most people never develop. So we've covered pattern synthesis, systems thinking, and psychological depth. But there's one more form of hidden genius, perhaps the most important and most overlooked. What happens before anyone else sees the problem? What allows deep intuitives to position themselves and others for futures that haven't arrived yet? Stay with me for this final piece. The fourth form of hidden genius is anticipatory intelligence and strategic foresight. Most people are optimized for responding to what's already happened. They see the present clearly, they react to immediate circumstances, they solve the problem in front of them. This is how the majority of intelligence operates, reactive and present-focused. Deep intuitives live partially in the future, not in fantasy or wishful thinking, but in genuine anticipation based on pattern recognition of how systems evolve. They see the weak signals that indicate directional change before it becomes obvious. They detect the early-stage patterns that will compound into major shifts. They recognize trajectories, while others are still debating current state. This is what Jung meant when he said intuitive types perceive potentialities. They literally see what's emerging before it manifests. And this creates a form of strategic advantage that's almost impossible to quantify because it's about what doesn't happen. The mistakes not made, the disasters averted, the opportunities captured early, the position taken before the shift. When a deep intuitive says, "I think this is going to change fundamentally in the next few years," they're not speculating wildly. They're synthesizing multiple weak signals, technological trends, cultural shifts, economic pressures, behavioral patterns into a probabilistic forecast that has genuine accuracy. When they advise someone to leave a relationship or job before it becomes obviously necessary, they're seeing the trajectory based on early indicators that others dismiss as insufficient data. When they position themselves for an opportunity that doesn't yet exist but will, they're using anticipatory intelligence to create advantage. And this isn't limited to big decisions. It's the daily micro-predictions that prove accurate. Knowing how a meeting will go before it starts, anticipating exactly how someone will react, seeing that the current approach will fail before it's tried, recognizing that two people will eventually conflict based on incompatibility no one else notices yet. The tragedy is that this form of genius is only validated retroactively after the thing they predicted comes true. But by then, no one remembers that they predicted it, or they attribute the accuracy to luck, or the deep intuitive has learned to stop voicing predictions because being right about negative outcomes brings no satisfaction and often generates resentment. But imagine having this person on your team before a major strategic decision. Imagine consulting them before a significant life choice. Imagine the value of someone who can see 6 months, a year, 5 years ahead with better-than-chance accuracy. That's not psychic ability. That's pattern recognition, systems thinking, and probabilistic forecasting operating at an exceptional level. That's genius. And it's hidden because it operates in the space of what could be rather than what is. So here's where we are. You've seen 4 forms of hidden genius: pattern synthesis, complexity navigation, psychological depth, and anticipatory intelligence. But how do you make this visible and valued without losing its power? How do you claim this genius in a world that doesn't recognize it? That's what I'm about to show you. The first strategy is to document your accuracy. Start keeping a prediction log, not to prove yourself to others, but to build your own confidence in your perception. When you have an insight about how something will unfold, write it down with a date. When you perceive a pattern others don't see, record it. When your psychological read on a situation proves accurate, note it. This isn't about ego, it's about counteracting years of being told your perception is unreliable. When you have concrete evidence of your pattern recognition accuracy, you stop apologizing for your insights. You start trusting yourself, and that confidence changes how you present your genius to the world. The second strategy is to find the translation point. Your genius is real, but if you can't communicate it, it remains powerless. Learn to translate pattern synthesis into concrete recommendations, systems thinking into clear if-then scenarios, psychological insight into actionable guidance, anticipatory intelligence into strategic positioning. Instead of, "I'm seeing a complex pattern here, that suggests systemic misalignment. Try. 3 things are happening simultaneously that will create a problem in about 6 months. Here's what I'm seeing and what we could do now. Same genius, accessible delivery. The goal isn't to dumb down your perception. It's to build bridges between how you see and how others need to receive information. The third strategy is to position yourself where your genius is needed. Stop trying to prove your value in environments that don't recognize this form of intelligence. Your genius isn't for every context. It's for complexity, for strategic decisions, for human development, for innovation, for systems that need deep understanding. Seek roles explicitly labeled strategy, research, systems design, organizational development, counseling, creative direction, advisory positions. These are environments where pattern synthesis, complexity navigation, psychological depth, and foresight are the job, not weird extras you bring that make people uncomfortable. When you're in the right context, your hidden genius becomes obvious genius. The fourth strategy is to build your evidence through micro-demonstrations. You can't make someone understand pattern synthesis by explaining it, but you can demonstrate it by solving a problem they care about using insights they couldn't access. You can show systems thinking by predicting consequences and being proven right. You can reveal psychological depth by offering the insight that shifts someone's entire perspective. Small demonstrations accumulate into reputation, and reputation eventually creates the space for your genius to be recognized and utilized at scale. So now you understand the full answer to that paradox from the beginning. Intuitive genius stays hidden because it operates in the invisible realm, in prevention, early detection, synthesis. Because it can't be demonstrated on conventional terms that sensing-based validation systems require. Because it makes others uncomfortable when you see more clearly than they do. And because the systems we built to measure intelligence were designed by and for a completely different cognitive style. Jung struggled with this paradox because there was no easy solution, just the harder path of building your own evidence, finding your contexts, and making the invisible visible on your own terms. Here's the truth. The world isn't built to recognize your form of intelligence. The metrics are wrong. The reward system is misaligned. The visibility goes to different cognitive styles. But that doesn't make your genius less real or less valuable. Pattern synthesis creates innovation. Complexity navigation prevents disaster. Psychological depth transforms lives. Anticipatory intelligence positions for futures others can't see. You're not imagining your capabilities. You're not overthinking or making things complicated unnecessarily. You possess genuine forms of intelligence that operate invisibly, and the invisibility doesn't diminish the reality. The question isn't whether you have hidden genius. You do. The question is, will you continue to hide it, or will you start making it visible in ways that create value, impact, and recognition? Because the world needs minds that can synthesize across domains when specialists are stuck, that can navigate genuine complexity when everyone else is oversimplifying, that can perceive human dynamics others miss, that can see what's coming before it arrives. Your genius has been hidden long enough. Long. If this resonates, leave a comment about which form of hidden genius you recognize most strongly in yourself. Pattern synthesis, systems thinking, psychological depth, or anticipatory intelligence. If you want more content that celebrates the deep intuitive mind instead of pathologizing it, hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs permission to finally claim their invisible intelligence. Because the real tragedy isn't that your genius is hidden. It's believing it doesn't exist at all.